The shoulder and the subway. New York City was alive even at night, its streets buzzing with restless energy, a place where dreams and struggles lived side by side, where some people chased opportunities with shining eyes while others simply fought to survive another day. And in this crowd of millions there was Emma Carter, a young single mother who carried more burdens than anyone could see at first glance. Emma was only 28, but her tired face and weary eyes often made her look older. She had once been full of hope, full of ambition, back in the days when she was in high school writing essays about becoming a teacher. But life had not been kind. She had fallen in love with the wrong man, and when he walked away, leaving her alone with a baby, the world demanded that she grow up quickly. Every single day she woke up not for herself, but for the little boy who depended on her. Oliver, her 4-year-old son, was her heart. He had wide brown eyes that carried innocence and curiosity. He liked toy cars and bedtime stories, and every night before sleeping he whispered, "I love you, Mommy," in a way that gave her strength to push through. But keeping him fed, clothed, and cared for was a mountain she climbed daily. Emma worked double shifts at Manny's Diner, a small place in Queens where she poured coffee, carried heavy trays, and endured rude customers with a forced smile. It was late on a rainy Wednesday when Emma's story began to twist in a way no one could have predicted. She had just finished a double shift, her sneakers soaked from the puddles on the sidewalk, her paper bag carrying leftover pancakes for Oliver. The food would serve as both dinner and breakfast tomorrow. Her uniform smelled faintly of grease and coffee, and her back ached from hours of standing. She held Oliver's tiny hand as they hurried down the steps into the subway station. The screech of trains and smell of metal filled the air. "Hold tight, baby," she said, brushing strands of blonde hair off her damp forehead. Oliver rubbed his eyes. "I'm hungry," he murmured softly, his little voice breaking her heart. "I know, sweetheart. We'll eat on the train. Just hold on," Emma replied, giving him a tired smile and squeezing his hand. They boarded a crowded train, the seats nearly all taken, the sound of chatter and the rumble of wheels echoing through the car. Emma found one seat open and quickly guided Oliver to sit down. She stood in front of him, gripping the metal pole for balance, her arms trembling from exhaustion. Oliver leaned against her side, half asleep. The train rocked back and forth, and Emma felt her eyes growing heavy. Minutes passed. The crowd shifted as people got off and others got on. Eventually, the seat beside Oliver opened, and Emma sank into it with relief. She clutched the paper bag of pancakes tightly, afraid to let it slip. Oliver's head rested on her lap as his breathing slowed. Emma tried to stay awake, but her body begged for rest. That was when he entered. A tall man in a sharp charcoal suit stepped into the train car at the next stop. His presence immediately drew attention, not because he demanded it, but because he carried himself with quiet authority. His hair was neatly combed, his shoes polished, and the way he stood made it clear he was not an ordinary commuter. His name was Alexander Grant, though Emma did not know it yet. Alexander was the CEO of Grant Industries, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in New York. He was only 35 but already worth millions. Newspapers often wrote about him, calling him ruthless in the boardroom, brilliant in strategy, and untouchable in the world of business. But here on the subway, he looked simply like another tired man going home. He spotted the only seat left. Beside Emma, he sat down quietly, pulling out his phone, scrolling through emails with practiced focus. He was used to private cars and luxury rides, but tonight his driver was unavailable, and he had chosen to experience what ordinary people called daily life. He didn't mind. In fact, he found it grounding. Emma barely noticed him at first, her head drooping with fatigue, the rhythm of the train lulling her further. She told herself to stay awake, to keep strong for Oliver, but the exhaustion was too deep. Slowly, unknowingly, she leaned sideways until her head rested gently on Alexander's shoulder. Gasps whispered through the train car. A few passengers glanced with surprise. Some even smirked. After all, it wasn't every day that a woman in a wrinkled diner uniform fell asleep on the shoulder of a man in a designer suit. Alexander froze for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he turned his head slightly. He could feel the soft weight of her hair against his shoulder, her breathing even and slow. He could have shifted, he could have woken her, he could have pulled away coldly as many CEOs might, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the sight of the little boy asleep on her lap, his small fingers still curled around the paper bag of pancakes. Maybe it was the exhaustion written across Emma's face, lines etched not by age but by sacrifice. Alexander felt a strange tug in his chest, a memory of his own mother, who once worked late nights to raise him after his father had died. For the first time in years, the powerful CEO didn't think about profits, deadlines, or corporate battles. He simply sat still, letting the stranger rest on his shoulder. The train clattered through dark tunnels, rocking them gently. He could smell the faint scent of coffee and soap from her uniform, so different from the perfumes he was used to. The other passengers whispered. One woman pulled out her phone to snap a picture discreetly, sensing something unusual in this simple moment. But Alexander ignored them, his eyes fixed forward, his body unmoving. Time stretched, and when the train finally screeched to Emma's stop, she stirred awake, blinking in confusion, realizing with horror that her head had been resting on a stranger's shoulder. She sat up quickly, her cheeks flushing red. I'm so sorry, she whispered, clutching Oliver and the bag tightly. Alexander turned to look at her, his eyes calm, his voice low. Don't be. You needed the rest, he said simply. Emma stared at him for a second, taken aback, his suit, his watch, his air of wealth. He was clearly someone far above her world. She muttered another apology, then hurried off the train, Oliver holding her hand, her heart racing with embarrassment. She told herself she would never see him again. He was just another stranger in this endless city. But fate had other plans. As the subway doors closed and Alexander watched her disappear into the crowd, something stirred in him, an instinct he couldn't explain. He didn't know who she was, but he knew this moment wasn't finished, not yet, not by chance. And so the story truly began, with a poor single mom, a powerful CEO, and one night on a crowded subway that would shock everyone who thought they already knew how life was supposed to go. The man who returned. The morning after that subway ride, Emma woke up with aching muscles and a guilty heart, her mind replaying the moment again and again. She couldn't forget the way her head had rested on a stranger's shoulder, the stranger who had been dressed like no one she could ever afford to meet in her own world. She remembered his expensive watch, his suit that looked like it belonged on television, and his eyes, calm, collected, and oddly kind when he told her not to apologize. The shame still burned in her cheeks as she poured cereal into a chipped bowl for Oliver. She didn't know that the man she had leaned on was Alexander Grant, a CEO whose face was printed in business magazines. She thought he was just another wealthy professional who would never remember her. Her life went on as usual, or at least it tried to. Mornings were rushed with Oliver pulling at her skirt, asking for more milk. Afternoons were filled with errands, and nights were claimed by Manny's Diner where Emma smiled at strangers and cleaned tables until her hands were raw. The world didn't give her time to dwell on small embarrassments. She had bigger problems like overdue rent, the electricity bill she was avoiding, and the preschool fee notice tucked inside her apron pocket. But across the city, Alexander sat in his glass-walled office overlooking Manhattan, a place most people only saw in photographs. Skyscrapers pierced the clouds around him. But his thoughts were not on contracts or profits. His mind returned to the subway and the woman who had fallen asleep on his shoulder. He didn't know why it mattered. After all, he had millions of things competing for his attention. His board demanded results, investors demanded progress, and yet the image of a tired mother, a little boy with wide eyes clutching a paper bag, lingered stubbornly in his memory. For years, Alexander had lived in a world of cold logic and ambition. His name was feared in negotiations, respected in the press, and whispered about by competitors. But his life was empty in ways no one could see. He had money, power, and luxury. Yet at night he often returned to a penthouse filled with silence, a silence so sharp it reminded him of loss. His mother had been a waitress just like Emma. He knew the struggles of a woman who gave up everything for a child, and watching Emma sleep so vulnerably on the subway awakened memories he had buried beneath success. It was 2 days later when fate tightened its thread again. Emma was rushing through her shift at Manny's Diner, balancing plates of bacon and eggs, trying to calm a complaining customer, and sneaking glances at the clock because she had to pick up Oliver. Her manager, Mr. Henson, was a gruff man with little patience. He barked at her when she spilled coffee. "Focus, Emma, or I'll cut your hours," he snapped. She bit her tongue, fighting back tears, because hours meant money and money meant rent. The bell above the diner door jingled, and Emma glanced up automatically with her usual tired smile. Then her body froze. Standing at the entrance, tall and perfectly out of place among the cracked vinyl booths and smell of grease, was the man from the subway, Alexander Grant. For a moment, Emma thought she was imagining him. Her breath caught, and the tray in her hand wobbled dangerously. He looked the same: sharp suit, polished shoes, the quiet authority that made people step aside without him asking. But there was something softer in his eyes as they met hers, a flicker of recognition. He walked inside and chose a booth by the window, ignoring the curious stares of other customers. Emma's heart pounded. She wanted to hide, to run, to pretend she didn't see him. But Mr. Henson's voice barked again. "Emma, table 5, move it." Trembling, she carried a menu and approached. "Good morning, sir," she said in a low voice, hoping he wouldn't remember, hoping this would just be another order. But his lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, more like a knowing look. "Good morning," he replied calmly. "I'll have coffee, black, and whatever you recommend for breakfast." Her hands shook as she scribbled the order. "Coming right up," she muttered, retreating quickly. She told herself it was coincidence. He was just a customer. People like him didn't notice women like her, but deep down she knew it wasn't chance. When she returned with the coffee, Alexander studied her closely. The exhaustion on her face, the quick way she checked the clock, the careful smile she forced. "You work hard," he said softly. Emma blinked, startled. "It's just a job," she replied, setting the cup down. "Jobs keep roofs over heads," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. Emma didn't know what to say. She simply nodded and turned away. The breakfast rush ended, and the diner grew quieter. Alexander remained, sipping his coffee slowly, as though he had no urgent meeting to attend. Emma avoided his gaze, embarrassed and confused. Why was he here? Why was he looking at her as if he knew her? She didn't want charity. She didn't want pity. She had spent years proving she could stand on her own, but a small part of her, tired, aching, human, wondered what it would feel like if someone powerful cared enough to see her struggle. When Alexander finally left, he placed a bill on the table far larger than the check. Emma's hands trembled as she picked it up. Tucked under it was a simple note written in neat handwriting. "Rest when you can. The world is harsh, but you are stronger than you the ink." Emma's throat tightened, her eyes blurred with tears. No customer had ever left her words, only coins and bills. She pressed the note to her chest for a moment before slipping it into her apron pocket. It was foolish, she told herself, to feel comfort from a stranger's words. Foolish to imagine they meant anything. Yet deep down, her heart felt a tiny spark of hope she hadn't known in years. That night, after Oliver was asleep, Emma sat by the small window of her apartment, holding the note again under the faint glow of a lamp. She whispered aloud, "Who are you?" Knowing there would be no answer, but across the city, Alexander sat at his desk in a room filled with glass and steel, staring at the city lights, and he too wondered who Emma Carter really was. Their worlds were galaxies apart, one built of power and wealth, the other of survival and sacrifice. And yet destiny had placed them on a collision course, and what began as a tired head resting on a stranger's shoulder was about to grow into something that would test not only Emma's courage but also Alexander's soul. Because life has a way of bringing together the broken pieces that seem least likely to fit, and when they do, everyone watching is left in shock. Emma's heart pounded. She wanted to hide, to run, to pretend she didn't see him, but Mr. Henson's voice barked again. "Emma, table 5, move it!" Trembling, she carried a menu and approached. "Good morning, sir," she said in a low voice, hoping he wouldn't remember, hoping this would just be another order. But his lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, more like a knowing look. "Good morning," he replied calmly. "I'll have coffee, black, and whatever you recommend for breakfast." Her hand shook as she scribbled the order. "Coming right up," she muttered, retreating quickly. She told herself it was coincidence. He was just a customer. People like him didn't notice women like her, but deep down she knew it wasn't chance. When she returned with the coffee, Alexander studied her closely, the exhaustion on her face, the quick way she checked the clock, the careful smile she forced. "You work hard," he said softly. Emma blinked, startled. "It's just a job," she replied, setting the cup down. "Jobs keep roofs over heads," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. Emma didn't know what to say. She simply nodded and turned away. The breakfast rush ended and the diner grew quieter. Alexander remained sipping his coffee slowly as though he had no urgent meeting to attend. Emma avoided his gaze, embarrassed and confused. Why was he here? Why was he looking at her as if he knew her? She didn't want charity. She didn't want pity. She had spent years proving she could stand on her own. But a small part of her, tired, aching, human, wondered what it would feel like if someone powerful cared enough to see her struggle. When Alexander finally left, he placed a bill on the table far larger than the check. Emma's hands trembled as she picked it up. Tucked under it was a simple note written in neat handwriting. Rest when you can. The world is harsh, but you are stronger than you think. Emma's throat tightened, her eyes blurred with tears. No customer had ever left her words, only coins and bills. She pressed the note to her chest for a moment before slipping it into her apron pocket. It was foolish, she told herself, to feel comfort from a stranger's words. Foolish to imagine they meant anything, yet deep down her heart felt a tiny spark of hope she hadn't known in years. That night, after Oliver was asleep, Emma sat by the small window of her apartment, holding the note again under the faint glow of a lamp. She whispered aloud, "Who are you?" Knowing there would be no answer, but across the city, Alexander sat at his desk in a room filled with glass and steel, staring at the city lights, and he too wondered who Emma Carter really was. Their worlds were galaxies apart, one built of power and wealth, the other of survival and sacrifice. And yet destiny had placed them on a collision course, and what began as a tired head resting on a stranger's shoulder was about to grow into something that would test not only Emma's courage, but also Alexander's soul, because life has a way of bringing together the broken pieces that seem least likely to fit, and when they do, everyone watching is left in shock. The bridge between worlds. Emma woke up the next morning with the note still pressed between the pages of an old recipe book she kept by her bedside. She had tucked it there the night before, not wanting Oliver to find it and ask questions she could not answer. Yet as she made breakfast for him, pouring milk into a chipped bowl and spreading peanut butter thinly over stale bread, her eyes drifted again and again toward the book. She told herself that the note meant nothing, that it was only words left behind by a kind stranger. But her heart knew better. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to her as if her strength mattered, as if her efforts were seen. At Manny's diner later that day, she moved with her usual rhythm, filling coffee cups, balancing trays, and scrubbing sticky counters. Yet her mind wandered back to the man with the calm eyes and sharp suit. She thought she would never see him again, but destiny had different plans. For just before the dinner rush began, the door opened, and there he was again, Alexander Grant, stepping inside with quiet authority. Heads turned, whispers rose. His presence was like a stone thrown into still water, creating ripples everywhere. Emma's breath caught in her chest. She tried to appear calm, wiping her hands on her apron and avoiding his gaze, but she knew he had come for more than food. He slid into the same booth, by the window, as though it had been waiting for him. When she finally approached with her pad in hand, her voice trembled slightly. "What can I get you today?" When the world closed in. The days after their meeting at the park passed in a rhythm that felt strange to Emma. For years, her life had been a constant cycle of exhaustion, work, and scraping together enough to survive. But now, unexpectedly, Alexander's quiet presence kept returning. He appeared at the diner some evenings, always sitting in the same booth, sometimes speaking very little, sometimes asking Emma simple questions that lingered in her mind long after he left. Oliver, meanwhile, seemed to glow at the mere mention of Alexander's name. The boy would chatter about how Mr. Alexander had listened to him talk about toy cars and had clapped when he climbed the slide. Emma tried to stay cautious, reminding herself that their worlds were not the same, that a CEO and a single mother had no reason to share paths, yet her heart began to shift in ways she did not admit, not even to herself. But the universe has a way of testing people at the moment when they feel a flicker of peace, and for Emma that test arrived suddenly, brutally, on a Thursday afternoon. The diner was crowded, a rush of customers filling every booth, voices blending into a wall of noise. Emma moved quickly, balancing plates, ignoring the ache in her shoulders, when her manager, Mr. Henson, called her to the back office, his face pinched tighter than usual. "Emma, we need to talk," he said sharply. She swallowed hard and followed him, already sensing trouble. Inside the small office that smelled of grease and stale coffee, Henson closed the door and turned on her with cold eyes. "I've had complaints," he said flatly. "Customers say you're distracted, slow, you make mistakes, and you talk too much at tables. I don't run a charity, Emma. I run a business, and if you can't keep up, you're out." His words landed like heavy stones. Emma's throat tightened. "I work double shifts, sir. I don't complain. I do. Oh, everything I can." She began, but he cut her off, slamming a file onto the desk. "That's not good enough. You're late too often. You leave early sometimes. You think I don't notice? I can't carry dead weight. You're done after this week." The room tilted. Emma gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. "Please," she whispered. "I have a child. I need this job. I'll do better." Henson's face remained hard. "Not my problem, Carter. Life's tough. You'll figure it out." And just like that, the fragile thread holding her world together began to snap. Emma stumbled out of the office, her legs weak, her vision blurred. She forced herself to finish the shift, but every plate she carried felt heavier. Every smile she forced felt like glass breaking. By the time she reached home that night, she collapsed onto the worn sofa, tears streaming silently as Oliver played with his toy cars on the floor. He looked up with wide eyes. "Mommy, are you sick?" he asked gently. She wiped her face quickly and forced a smile. "No, baby. Mommy's just tired." But inside, fear clawed at her chest. Without the diner, she would have nothing, no income, no way to pay rent. The next day, Alexander returned to the diner, but Emma was not the same. She avoided his eyes. Her smiles were hollow. When he asked how she was, she simply nodded and said, "Fine," though he could see the truth in the way her hands trembled as she poured coffee. When she turned to leave, he spoke softly but firmly, "Emma, sit." She froze, staring at him. Her pride screamed to walk away, but something in his tone made her slide into the seat opposite him, her apron crumpled in her lap. "You're not fine," Alexander said evenly, his eyes piercing yet gentle. "What happened?" Emma shook her head quickly. "It's nothing, really, just work stress. I'll manage." But his gaze did not waver. It was the gaze of a man who had seen lies dressed as strength before. Finally, she broke, her voice cracking. "They're letting me go. I don't know how I'll keep the apartment. I don't know how I'll—" Her words dissolved into silence, her hands covering her face. For a long moment, Alexander said nothing, only watched her with an expression Emma could not read. Then he reached across the table, not to touch her, but to steady his voice. "Emma, listen to me. Losing this job does not mean losing yourself. You are stronger than one man's decision, stronger than a paycheck that treats you like you're replaceable. You've carried your son, your home, your life alone. That is not weakness. That is power." Emma looked up, her eyes wet, and for the first time she saw not a CEO, not a stranger, but a man who understood her pain. Still, she shook her head. "I don't need pity, Alexander. I don't need charity." Her voice trembled, but her pride held. "I just need to find another job somehow." He nodded slowly. "And you will. But you don't have to fight every battle with no armor, Emma. Even the strongest warriors accept help sometimes." His words sank deep, but she could not accept them yet. She stood quickly, wiping her face. "I have to get back to work," she whispered, leaving him sitting alone in the booth. That evening, Emma searched frantically online, sending resumes to places she wasn't qualified for, applying to night shifts that would steal more of Oliver's childhood from her. She barely slept, but when she dropped Oliver at preschool the next morning, she found herself face to face with Alexander again, standing outside, waiting as if he had known she would come. "You follow with me?" she asked, anger and confusion mixing. He shook his head calmly. "No, I asked, and I found you." His honesty startled her. "Why?" she demanded. "Why are you doing this?" His eyes softened, his voice lowered. "Because I see a woman breaking her back to hold her world together, and I can't stand by when I have the power to change that." Emma clenched her fists, torn between gratitude and fury. "I don't want to be your project," she hissed. "I don't want to be someone you fix for your conscience." Alexander's gaze held steady. "You're not my project, Emma. You're a person, and you deserve better. You and your son both." For a long time she said nothing, her chest rising and falling. Finally she whispered, "What do you want from me?" His answer was simple: "Nothing." Those words lingered with her all day, echoing in her mind as she folded laundry, as she cooked noodles for Oliver, as she stared at her thin wallet. Nothing, he had said, and yet it felt like everything. For the first time in years, she wondered if someone truly meant to stand beside her without taking anything in return. But the world outside was cruel, and soon Emma would discover just how much cruelty she was still up against. Because a week later, when she went to Manny's to pick up her final paycheck, she overheard two waitresses whispering, "Did you hear why Henson fired her? Some big guy in a suit kept coming around asking for her. He said it was making the customers uncomfortable. She's probably involved with him. Can't say I'm surprised. Girls like her always find a way to get attention." Their laughter burned into Emma's ears. Her face flushed with shame. She snatched her envelope and walked out quickly, her dignity bruised deeper than ever. That night, in the quiet of her apartment, Emma cried silently while Oliver slept. She felt the walls closing in, the world too heavy to hold. She thought of Alexander's words, of his eyes steady on hers, and for the first time she considered what it would mean to let someone truly see her pain, not as weakness, but as truth, the weight of being seen. Emma tried to carry her life forward after losing her job at Manny's, but survival grew heavier by the day. She scraped together temporary work, cleaning offices at night and helping in a laundromat on weekends. Yet no matter how many hours she pushed through, the numbers never balanced. Rent notices piled up, the refrigerator grew emptier, and sometimes she pretended to Oliver that she had already eaten so he would not worry when she gave him the last portion of dinner. Still she smiled at him. Still she read him bedtime stories with tired eyes, because that was who she was. A mother who would burn herself out entirely before letting her son feel the cold weight of hunger. Alexander, however, had not forgotten her. In fact, she seemed to fill his thoughts even as meetings, contracts, and board discussions swirled around him. He found himself distracted during presentations, seeing instead the quiet determination in Emma's eyes, the way her son laughed freely despite their struggles, and most of all, the unyielding pride that refused to let her accept help. He admired her deeply for that. But it also worried him because he knew how fragile survival could be in a city that devoured the weak. One Friday evening, Alexander made a decision. He told his driver to stop near the laundromat Emma had begun working in. He walked inside quietly, blending in as much as a man like him could, and found her folding clothes with tired but precise movements. She looked up in shock when she saw him, her cheeks flushing. "You can't keep following me," she said firmly, though her voice shook. Alexander met her gaze calmly. "I'm not following you, Emma. I'm making sure you don't drown in silence." She looked away quickly. "I told you I'll manage," she whispered. "I know," he said softly, "but managing doesn't mean you should suffer alone." Their eyes met, and through us. For the first time, Emma did not push him away entirely. Something inside her, worn down by the endless fight, allowed his words to land. She did not answer, but she did not send him out either. Instead, she continued folding, her hands trembling only slightly. Alexander stayed a while, speaking gently about ordinary things, about the weather, about books he had read as a child, even about mistakes he had made when younger, stories he had never shared with anyone else. Emma listened quietly, and when he left, she realized with surprise that she had not felt judged. She had felt lighter, if only for a moment. The following week, Alexander appeared again, but this time not in the laundromat. He appeared in Oliver's world. For when Emma picked her son up from preschool, she found Alexander waiting nearby with a small smile. Oliver squealed with delight, running to him. "Alexander, did you bring more stories?" Emma froze. "Stories?" she asked sharply. Alexander chuckled softly. "I told him one last week at the park, about a boy who built castles from nothing but sand and courage." Oliver nodded enthusiastically. "It was the best story ever, Mommy." Emma's eyes narrowed. "You can't just show up in his life like this," she whispered, but Alexander crouched down, looking Oliver in the eyes. "I'll only come if your mom says it's okay," he said gently. Oliver turned pleading eyes to her. "Please, Mommy, just one more story." Emma's heart twisted, caught between fear and gratitude. She hesitated, then finally nodded once. "Fine, but only here and only sometimes." Oliver clapped happily, and Alexander told another story. his voice calm yet vivid, painting worlds that made the little boy laugh with delight. Emma watched silently, her defenses cracking, because in that moment Alexander was not a CEO, not a man of wealth, but simply a person giving joy to a child. Days became weeks, and soon it became natural for Alexander to appear in their small circle. He would walk with them from preschool, sit with them at the park, sometimes even join them for cheap hot dogs on a bench. He never flaunted his wealth, never offered money. Instead, he offered time, attention, and words. Oliver blossomed under his encouragement, showing him drawings, telling him about dreams, and Emma, though still guarded, found herself speaking more openly, sharing pieces of her life she had buried for years. She told him how she once wanted to be a teacher, how she loved books but hadn't read one in months, how she dreamed of Oliver one day, having everything she never could. Alexander listened, always listened, and each time Emma spoke, he felt himself drawn closer. Yet he also knew the danger. He was a public figure. His presence in her life could invite judgment, misunderstanding, and worse, but he could not step back, not now, not when she had become the first person in years to make him feel real. That danger arrived one afternoon in the form of a camera flash. Emma, Oliver, and Alexander were walking out of a bookstore where Alexander had quietly bought Oliver a small picture book about stars. Emma protested at first, but he insisted it was a gift, nothing more. And as they laughed together outside, a photographer hiding across the street snapped a photo. Within days it appeared in an online gossip column. Mysterious woman and child seen with tech CEO Alexander Grant. Secret family? Emma's world shook violently. Co-workers at the laundromat whispered. Neighbors gave her strange looks. Even Oliver's preschool teacher asked awkward questions. Is it true? Are you involved with him? Emma's face burned as she denied it. Furious and humiliated, she confronted Alexander the next day. This is exactly why I didn't want you in my life, she cried, her voice sharp with pain. Now everyone thinks I'm some woman chasing money, using you for status. Tears welled in her eyes. Do you know how hard I've worked to keep my dignity? And now it's gone because of one picture. Alexander stood silent for a moment, his jaw tight. Then he spoke with quiet intensity. Emma, I never wanted to put you through this, but listen to me. The world will always talk, always twist stories. But what matters is what you and I know to be true. You are not using me. You are surviving with courage most people can't imagine. And if the world can't see that, then let them choke on their own lies. His voice grew firmer. I will not walk away because of rumors. Not when you and Oliver mean more to me than a headline. Emma's breath caught, his words breaking through her anger. She saw the sincerity burning in his eyes, yet her fear remained. But what about Oliver? She whispered. He's just a child. He doesn't deserve this attention. Alexander's gaze softened. Then let me shield him. Let me shield both of you. For the first time, Emma felt her pride falter. She had always stood alone, always fought with no one at her side. But now, faced with judgment and whispers, she realized maybe standing alone was not strength anymore. Maybe real strength was knowing when to let someone stand with you. She did not answer him that day. But when Oliver tugged her hand later and said, Mommy, can we see Alexander tomorrow? She simply nodded, her heart torn but undeniably drawn. That night, Emma sat awake long after Oliver had fallen asleep. Staring at the city lights through the cracked blinds, she thought of every sacrifice she had made, every battle she had fought, and every tear she had swallowed. She thought of the picture splashed online and the cruel comments beneath it. But she also thought of Alexander's steady voice, his promise not to walk away, and for the first time in years she wondered if maybe, just maybe, her life was not meant to be endured alone. And across the city, Alexander stared at his own reflection in the tall glass of his penthouse window, his hands clenched at his sides, because he knew the gossip was only the beginning. If he wanted to truly be in Emma's world, he would have to fight battles even fiercer than boardroom wars, battles against prejudice, against lies, against the walls Emma had built around her heart. But Alexander Grant had never been a man to turn back once he had chosen a path, and this time his path was clear. The city did not know it yet, the gossip writers did not know it, the onlookers did not know it, but a poor single mom and her son had just become the center of a storm that would shock everyone watching. And what they would discover in the days ahead was that sometimes the most powerful stories are not written in boardrooms or headlines, but in the quiet courage of ordinary people learning to trust again, the fire of judgment. The photograph that had appeared online seemed small at first, just one blurry image of a woman in a diner uniform walking beside a powerful CEO while holding her little boy's hand. But in the world of endless clicks and hungry gossip, one picture was enough to ignite a storm. Within hours, social media was buzzing with questions, speculation, and cruel assumptions. Some claimed Emma was chasing Alexander for his money, others sneered that she had trapped him with her son, and still others, without knowing anything of her story, mocked her clothes, her tired face, and the simple way she carried herself. Emma discovered the full weight of it when a neighbor stopped her in the hallway of their apartment building. A woman she had once exchanged polite smiles with now smirked and said, "So Emma, dating millionaires now? Didn't think you had it in you." The words cut deep, not because they were true, but because they dripped with disdain. At the laundromat, "Tea!" Two co-workers whispered openly when she walked past, their eyes darting between her and the glowing phone screens that displayed the article. Even at Oliver's preschool, she caught a pair of parents whispering near the gate, their laughter sharp and cruel. Emma had always lived with dignity, no matter how poor she was. She had told herself that her worth was not tied to wealth, but to hard work and sacrifice. But now, with strangers reducing her to a caricature, with whispers following her like shadows, she felt her dignity cracking. Each time she looked at Oliver, innocent and unaware, her heart ached with fear. What would these rumors do to him? Would he grow up ashamed of his mother? When Alexander arrived one evening outside her building, holding a small bag of books he thought Oliver might enjoy, Emma met him at the door with fire in her eyes. "You don't understand what's happening," she said sharply, her voice trembling. "People are talking. They're judging. They're tearing me apart, and I can't protect Oliver from it." Alexander's calm gaze held hers, but Emma pressed on, her words breaking. "I can't do this, Alexander. I can't let you ruin what little peace we had. You're a world I don't belong in, and being near you is destroying me." For the first time, Alexander looked shaken. His lips tightened, his jaw clenched, yet his eyes softened with something Emma did not expect: hurt. "Emma," he said quietly, "I never wanted to bring harm into your life. I thought I could bring light, but you are right about one thing. Our worlds are not the same, and if you truly want me gone, I will go." His words stunned her, because she had expected him to argue, to insist, to overpower her resistance as powerful men so often did. But he simply looked at her, giving her the choice, and in that moment she realized just how much he respected her, even in rejection. That night Emma lay awake in silence, listening to Oliver's soft breathing beside her, tears soaking her pillow. She had asked for distance, but her heart ached with emptiness. She thought of his steady voice, his gentle presence, the way he listened when no one else had, and she realized the cruelest part of it all was not the gossip, but the thought of losing someone who had begun to make her believe in herself again. Yet her fear was stronger still, the fear of being crushed by judgment, of watching Oliver carry the weight of whispers too heavy for a child. Meanwhile, in the glass tower of his penthouse, Alexander stood before his window staring at the city below, his reflection a dark shadow against the glowing skyline. For years he had fought battles against rival companies, politicians, and investors, and he had always emerged victorious because he was unyielding. But now he faced a different kind of battle, one not of numbers or contracts, but of perception, of prejudice, of a society eager to destroy a poor woman daring to stand beside a man like him. He clenched his fists and made a decision. If Emma would not accept his help in private, then he would fight for her in public. The opportunity came sooner than expected. A week later, Alexander was scheduled to speak at a charity gala attended by reporters, business leaders, and politicians. His team advised him to ignore the rumors, to stay silent and let the gossip fade. But Alexander had already made up his mind. As he stood before the microphone in the glittering ballroom, cameras flashing, he spoke not about profits or innovation, but about dignity, about unseen sacrifices, about the quiet strength of people who worked harder than anyone else yet were dismissed because of their clothes, their income, their circumstances. His voice rang clear. "True worth is not found in bank accounts or titles. I've met people with more strength and one tired smile than in all the boardrooms of this city combined. We must stop judging stories we do not understand. The audience was silent, the words sinking into a room used to shallow speeches. But Alexander was not finished. He looked directly into the cameras, his eyes unflinching, and added, "And to those who spend their time tearing down a woman who has done nothing but care for her child and work with dignity, I say enough. Your cruelty says more about you than it ever could about her." The room erupted in whispers. Journalists scribbled furiously. Headlines the next morning were explosive. Alexander Grant defends mystery woman in emotional speech. Some mocked him for being sentimental, but many praised him, calling his words bold, calling them necessary. Emma read the news in shock, her hands trembling as she scrolled through the article on her phone. She saw the transcript of his speech, saw his defiance of the gossip, and tears filled her eyes. No one had ever stood for her like that. No one had ever risked their reputation to protect her name. And yet, even with her heart softening, fear still clawed at her chest. Because now it was not only gossip, it was headlines. And if her life had felt small before, it was now under a microscope. When Alexander appeared at her door again days later, she didn't send him away. She let him in. Oliver squealed with joy, leaping into his arms, and Emma watched as the boy wrapped his little arms around the man who had become more than a stranger, more than a visitor. Alexander met her eyes over Oliver's shoulder, his voice low and steady. "I told you, Emma, I will not walk away." Her pride, her fear, her walls, they all trembled. For the first time, she let herself imagine what it might mean to stop fighting alone, to allow someone to share the weight she had carried for so long. It was terrifying. It was uncertain. But as she stood there in her small apartment watching her son laugh in the arms of a man who had risked the world's judgment for them, the light beyond the storm. The days following Alexander's bold speech at the gala changed everything. What had once been whispers in alleyways and cruel laughter in laundromats became conversations that reached boardrooms, newsrooms, and living rooms across the city. For the first time, Emma Carter's existence was not hidden in the shadows of survival, but thrust into the light of public attention. At first, the glare felt unbearable. Headlines speculated endlessly. Strangers argued online about whether she deserved Alexander's defense, and photographers began lurking outside her building, snapping pictures whenever she stepped outside. Emma, who had spent years mastering the art of blending into the background, suddenly found herself visible in a way that made her want to retreat back into invisibility. Yet amid the noise, something unexpected began to happen. Alongside the critics who mocked her, voices of empathy rose. Women who had worked double shifts wrote online that they saw themselves in her. Mothers raising children alone shared her story in support, saying it gave them courage to hold their heads higher. Ordinary workers spoke of dignity, of how their lives too were judged unfairly by those who had never known struggle. The story of a tired single mom falling asleep on a CEO's shoulder began to transform into something more than gossip. It became a mirror in which many recognized their own battles. Emma struggled to understand it all. She still woke every morning in her small apartment, still clipped coupons and stretched meals, still kissed Oliver's forehead with the same fierce love as before. But now, when she walked down the street, people looked at her differently. Some eyes carried judgment, but others carried respect, even admiration. It was unsettling, and Emma did not know how to hold it. For years she had been invisible, and now the world insisted on seeing her. Through it all, Alexander remained steady. He did not disappear when the storm grew heavy. He appeared more often. He walked with her to Oliver's preschool despite the cameras. He sat in her apartment on evenings when exhaustion made her want to collapse, bringing nothing but his presence and his listening ear. He read stories to Oliver with patience and laughter. He never spoke of wealth or power in her small living room, never tried to fix her life with money, though Emma knew he could have done so easily. Instead, he offered the one thing she had never received from anyone outside of her son: respect. Still, Emma wrestled with doubt. Could she allow herself to trust this man fully? Could she risk opening her heart, knowing the world was watching, knowing the weight of judgment would never truly fade? One night, after Oliver was asleep, she asked him directly, her voice low but firm, "Why me, Alexander? Out of all the people in your world, why are you here, in mine?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because, Emma, you remind me of everything that matters. In boardrooms, I see ambition. In headlines, I see ego. But in you, I see strength, sacrifice, and honesty. You are not someone I pity. You are someone I admire. And Oliver, he is light. He is joy in a world that often forgets how to laugh. I don't need another partner in business. I need someone who reminds me of what it means to be human. That someone is you." Her heart tightened at his words. She wanted to believe them, wanted to let them melt the last pieces of ice around her trust. Yet scars do not heal overnight. She looked away, whispering, "I don't know if I can give you what you think you see." Alexander shook his head gently. "I don't need you to give me anything but yourself, Emma. That's all." It was not a declaration that solved her fears instantly, but it planted something deep, something she had not allowed to grow in years, the possibility of love that was not betrayal, of partnership that was not dependency, of respect that was not hollow. Weeks passed and slowly Emma's world began to shift. She found new work, this time at a community center that needed someone to help with childcare and tutoring. It paid little, but it fed her soul. She was surrounded by children, by laughter, by the faint echo of the teacher she had once dreamed of becoming. She found herself smiling more, not forced smiles for customers, but genuine ones that surprised her when they rose naturally. Alexander supported her quietly, never interfering, never demanding. Yet he used his influence subtly, securing grants for the community center, ensuring resources flowed in, all without attaching his name to it. When Emma discovered what he had done, she confronted him, anger and gratitude tangled together. "I told you I didn't want your charity," she said. Alexander met her fire with calm. "And you don't have it. You have my partnership. I don't give because you are weak, Emma. I give because together we can build something stronger for others too." She wanted to stay angry, but his words disarmed her, and in that moment she realized he did not see her as a burden. He saw her as an equal. As the months unfolded, their bond deepened. Oliver adored Alexander, often running to him with drawings or stories, calling him my friend. Emma still kept boundaries, still protected her heart fiercely, but the lines between their worlds blurred more with every passing day. And then came the evening that changed everything. It was a charity event at the community center, small and simple compared to the glittering galas Alexander usually attended. Children displayed artwork, volunteers served food, and parents gathered to celebrate. Emma had been working tirelessly to organize it, and as she stood before the modest crowd, explaining the center's mission and the importance of helping children from struggling families, she felt nervous but proud. She spoke of dignity, of how every parent wanted the same thing, for their children to dream without limits. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, and Emma felt tears sting her eyes. She caught sight of Alexander at the back, clapping with a look of pride she had never seen directed at her before. Afterward, he approached her, his voice quiet but strong. "You don't see it yet, Emma, but you are extraordinary. Tonight, everyone here saw what I've seen since the first time you fell asleep on my shoulder. You have a strength that changes people." The words landed deep, and this time she did not push them away. She let them settle in her heart. The weeks that followed cemented what had already been growing. Emma no longer feared Alexander's presence. She welcomed it. Oliver no longer saw him as a visitor. He saw him as family. And Emma, though cautious as ever, began to let her guard drop, little by little. One spring afternoon, as they sat together in the park watching Oliver chase butterflies, Emma finally said the words she had held back for so long. "Alexander, I don't know what the future looks like. I don't know how to live in your world, but I do know that when you're here, I don't feel alone anymore, and that matters more than anything." Alexander turned. To her, his eyes soft but steady. "Emma, I don't need you in my world. I want to build a new one with you, with Oliver. One that belongs to us, not to headlines, not to boardrooms, but to family.